Hey guys, my name is Andre. This is the world according to Andre. I am he. Some of you may have heard Elon Musk's Doge, his Doge organization, the Department of Government Efficiency, has been sending a lot of federal workers these emails requesting basically 5 things that happened to them during the week. Not 5 things that happened to them, but 5 achievements, 5 things they did during the week in their jobs. Now, I know a lot of friends of mine who've gotten this email. There's been conflicting guidance. I'm in the private sector. I did not get that email. But if I did get that email, I would say the following 5 things. Now, I'm in the private sector. Also, I believe in work-life boundaries. So I'm not actually going to tell you what I did at work. So the 5 things I did. I watched The Emperor's New Groove, classic Disney movie. I did not know David Spade played Cusco. I also watched Pocahontas, another Disney movie. I didn't realize that it didn't actually age as badly as one would think, given the subject matter. Also, speaking of things that didn't age that badly, Mel Gibson. Yeah, he has a problematic background, a little bit. That depends on your perspective, of course. But I think generally he's aged quite well. I bring up Mel Gibson because he played John Smith in Pocahontas. I did not know a lot of these classic Disney movies were that stacked with star power. I also had, I believe, a steak shawarma from a great restaurant in Georgetown. I had some Indian food on Friday, and I went to work. So I guess those were my 5 things for the week. And I recorded this podcast last Thursday, and here I am again recording it tonight on Thursday night. Last week, you may recall that I mentioned that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, was on a short list of top military officials who could possibly be fired. Well, not even within 12 hours, or even 10 or 8 hours of us releasing this episode last Friday, President Trump fired General Brown as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on February 21st. This move is quite rare. Typically, chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are nonpartisan officials. The military, of course, is a nonpartisan organization. We've seen chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff transcend administrations. You've seen a chairman appointed by a Republican continue through a Democratic administration and vice versa. However, General Brown's dismissal was part of this broader military shakeup. President Trump also fired Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, General James Sliff, and then JAGs, Judge Advocates General for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. These are essentially the military's nonpartisan legal advisors. Many people were quite concerned about the firing of the JAGs. Of course, people were certainly concerned about the firing of General Brown, CNO Franchetti, and so on. But let's dig into this a little bit deeper. General C.Q. Brown, who is he? Well, he's a 4-star general, a career fighter pilot with over 3,100 flight hours, including 130 combat hours. He was the first Black Air Force Chief of Staff, appointed, by the way, by President Trump in 2020, and the second Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs, following, of course, General Colin Powell. He was known really for his efforts around military modernization. His catchphrase was accelerate change or lose, and he advocated quite a bit for advanced technologies, including cyber defense, artificial intelligence, and space-based assets, unmanned systems, and then, of course, improving supply chains for military procurement. Because if you're fighting a war in the Pacific, in East Asia, and Southeast Asia, how are you going to get all your stuff from the West Coast of America? We need a lot of systems, and he was trying to do that. We also wanted to deter China and Russia, and he sought to engage in this modernization to basically produce air power and enhance our deterrence strategies. So he's no joke. He is a very qualified public servant, an incredible soldier, very well qualified to do his job. And President Trump thought so back in 2020 when he appointed him as Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So why was Brown fired? So Trump's letter firing General Brown was quite diplomatic. However, President Trump has long expressed frustration with the military leadership. General Brown is generally seen as part of this Pentagon establishment that President Trump has long criticized. And of course, we have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. General Brown was on that list of officers because he allegedly was supportive of DEI initiatives. Maybe that means making the military a more tolerant, welcoming, accepting place. Who knows? But Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth publicly said before he took office as Secretary of Defense that he actually wanted to fire General Brown himself, calling his DEI work, quote, woke, as one would expect. However, General Brown was generally supported by congressional leaders and defense officials, but President Trump probably viewed him as not aligned with his priorities. Again, this sort of speaks to, what is the president's vision when it comes to the defense apparatus, the military? Is it more aligned with military modernization, as his proponents would say? Is it aligned more so with political loyalty, as his critics would say? What is the president's vision? That's for you to decide. And if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're going to have very different images of the president's vision. So, who is President Trump aiming to replace General Brown with? Because that replacement is going to need congressional approval. So Lieutenant General Dan Caine is the named replacement. He is a retired Air National Guard fighter pilot. He flew F-16s with over 2,800 flight hours, about 150 in combat, and he is a relatively unconventional pick. Usually chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are four-star generals. They've usually led a combatant command or a service branch. So, for example, General Brown was leading the Air Force. Before then, General Caine does not have that four-star experience. He also has some CIA ties. He served as the Associate Director for Military Affairs at the CIA, had some counterterrorism experience, worked in special operations. He had senior roles at the Joint Special Operations Command and the Special Operations Command. And he also had a private sector career. He recently joined Shield Capital, which is a venture capital firm focused on defense and cybersecurity. He co-founded Rise Air, a private airline, and he is very well known as an entrepreneur in the defense space. So there are concerns about Caine. So as I said, he's not a four-star general. He's a three-star general. One may wonder, okay, like what's the difference between one star? There's quite a difference in terms of experience, but also breadth of command. What is the range of your command? And again, he never led that service branch or combatant command. People have said, okay, you want a four-star with broad joint force command. A presidential waiver would also be required for him to assume that role. On the other hand, proponents would say that, okay, he has a lot of private sector experience. His affiliation with Shield Capital indicates that this is a guy who wants to drive forward innovation, who wants to accelerate modernization, and could make defense acquisitions, which is known as this brutal, slow-paced beast of a machine, quicker, more agile, faster. So that's what proponents are saying. So we'll see. Obviously, there are political concerns when a president purges the military, which does not usually happen. One may see that as, okay, President Trump does not believe these leaders are loyal enough to him. So this is certainly going to be a debate that we're going to be playing through probably over the next few years around military politicization, particularly given President Trump's prior experience. Of course, we recall President Trump's criticisms of General Milley, who was the previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and so on. But General Caine, if he is confirmed, will be advising Trump on Ukraine and Russia, obviously the conflicts in the Middle East, and then probably most importantly, our defense posture in the Indo-Pacific. Influence, credibility, that is yet to be seen, basically. How is he received by the DoD? I think you're seeing positive reception within the defense industrial community, which is very interesting, given his background as an entrepreneur. In a political sense, obviously from the Democratic Party, you're seeing more negativity given the way in which his appointment occurred. He'll need Senate approval. He'll need that waiver. Democrats, some defense hawks, may challenge his nomination over those experience concerns. Again, this could be a very partisan vote given the nature of the firings, but we'll see how this actually affects, the Joint Chiefs of Staff's role in defense policy and what sort of alignment we see with his vision for the armed forces. So, folks, last week for our next story, you recall that I spent a lot of time talking about Ukraine. Well, this episode, I will also spend a lot of time talking about Ukraine because that is a situation that is still going on. Obviously, it's been going on since 2022, and we're seeing a lot of activity with the nature of the U.S. Ukraine relationship. So, the big thing, the big deal, I might say, is the U.S. Ukraine critical minerals deal that is expected. There are significant developments that are expected to occur with it today on Friday. Ukrainian President Zelensky is here to meet with President Trump to discuss that deal. But what's going on? So the United States and Ukraine are finalizing a major minerals deal, the details of which are pretty murky still. It's very unclear, what exactly is in the deal. Broader goal is essentially to establish an investment fund jointly owned by the United States and Ukraine that taps into Ukraine's critical mineral wealth. The deal is certainly a big shift in terms of how the United States approaches Ukraine. This is moving away, certainly, from the military aid that was very much predicated on this sort of moral stance that I think President Biden took towards this more transactional, resource-driven relationship under President Trump. You will often hear about the T word when I talk about President Trump and his deal making, his negotiations. That is transactional. You'll often see President Trump's transactionalism appear in his trade negotiations, in these discussions around tariffs and so on. And now you're seeing it appear in how the Ukraine war is ongoing, how the US supports Ukraine if it does continue to do so. This is also part of a broader US strategy, I think, essentially to reduce reliance on China for some of these minerals. Some of these critical minerals that I'll talk about in a little bit are certainly crucial in the defense sector, for electric vehicles, for energy. But if this deal goes forward, it could come at the expense of some of Ukraine's negotiating power. So essentially, the terms of the deal, what we know right now, and again, it's Friday morning, you're probably listening to this. This might change by Friday evening. But the deal as it is right now does not include explicit U.S. security guarantees. President Trump has stated that Europe should handle Ukraine's security instead. Some of the key Ukrainian resources include lithium, graphite, titanium, and rare earth elements. Again, these would be critical for military and energy sectors, quite valuable there. However, much of Ukraine's mineral wealth is still in some of these Russian occupied territories. So we could be having a significant access issue. So why does President Trump want this deal? Again, President Trump is transactional. He has long opposed, quote, free aid to Ukraine. He sees the minerals deal as a way to get basically a return on the investment for prior US support. So basically, according to President Trump, the American taxpayer would get their money back through these minerals rather than sending endless aid for, of course, quote, these endless wars. So President Trump is also pushing for peace talks with Russia, and he sees this deal as essentially a path to winding down U.S. involvement in the war while still maintaining some economic leverage over Ukraine. So Ukrainian President Zelensky initially resisted Trump's initial demand for a $500 billion minerals deal, saying that Ukraine hasn't actually received that much aid. However, Kyiv actually sees this as a way to secure long-term U.S. economic engagement and prevent total U.S. disengagement from the war. Like, if you have economic incentives in a certain piece of land, you're going to have more of a vested interest to preserve and protect and safeguard that land. So basically, if the US is financially invested in these resources, it might still offer this military support indirectly to protect those interests, as I said. Ukraine definitely still needs the military aid. But this deal does not guarantee future weapon shipments, as far as we know, currently on February 27th, Thursday night, when I am recording this. So just a note in case things change. And definitely keep reading the news on this because this is an active development. Zelensky, I believe, is in DC as I speak right now, and he'll be in DC on Friday. So European leaders are fairly alarmed or a bit critical of how this is all taking place. Basically, they're concerned that the US is stepping back from security commitments, and this would force Europe to take the lead in supporting Ukraine militarily. Russia would benefit if the US withdraws security aid and focuses only on minerals. Putin could see this as a green light, in essence, to press further militarily. And the Kremlin is already trying to lure US investors into Russian controlled mineral regions, potentially complicating the situation. On that Europe point earlier this week, if you were watching the news for some funny clips and so on, you may have seen French President Macron meet with President Trump. They talked about Ukraine. You saw today on Thursday, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer talking to President Trump about Ukraine. Of course, they talked about other issues as well, but Ukraine was a big factor. President Trump, I believe, said that Europe would get its money back from Ukraine. Both of those European leaders disputed Trump, saying, no, they paid for it. It's not really a loan. But anyway, I'm just putting it out there. Ukraine holds some of the world's most valuable untapped mineral deposits. I guess that's the big theme of this. You have lithium, rare earths. The US currently depends on China for a lot of this. You want to break China's hold on critical minerals. You want long-term supply chain security, and exploiting these resources is a long-term play. And Ukraine's mining sector may need major investment to become fully operational, which the US could potentially provide. However, will a deal actually be signed? That's TBD. We will see what will happen on Friday, today, when Zelensky meets with President Trump. And I'll have more for you next week. Actually, I'll probably have more for you earlier in the week because I may be interviewing someone early in the week who has significant experience in Ukraine. So I will point you to that episode once it's recorded early next week. On a side note, you may have also noticed the US participated in some controversial votes at the United Nations relating to Ukraine. So, in another major shift, the US actually voted against a Ukraine and Europe backed UN resolution that condemned Russia's aggression. Again, as I said last week repeatedly, Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia was the aggressor. That is generally accepted fact for many people in the Western world. However, the Trump administration pushed forward a neutral resolution that is inherently avoided blaming Russia and focused on a broad call for peace. So Russia actually voted for this US resolution, which is something new, seeing it as a diplomatic opening, while Ukraine and European allies were quite critical of this. Again, this is about transactionalism. Maybe President Trump's trying to play nice with Russia. He's trying to be a bit more diplomatic with Russia. Last week, I mentioned that President Trump called President Zelensky a dictator. Today, when asked about that remark, President Trump said, oh, I don't think I said that. Short-term memory loss? Who knows? He's a little old. But, I mean, look, basically, that UN vote, Trump's trying to lay the groundwork for negotiations with Russia. Again, I'm yet to see or understand really what concessions we're trying to get from Russia. But who knows? Maybe the art of the deal maker may have a plan to go forward. Who knows? We'll see. I'll have more for you early next week and then later next week on the next session of this. Our next story concerns the FBI because there are a lot of big changes happening at the FBI under President Trump's second term, and they're already causing quite a bit of major controversy. So Kash Patel, he is a longtime Trump loyalist. He doesn't actually have FBI experience, but he was confirmed last week as the new FBI director. In another unprecedented move, President Trump appointed Dan Bongino. He was a former Secret Serviceman, but is now really known as his right-wing podcaster, as the deputy director of the FBI. There was a little bit of opposition from within the agency to this move, but let's dig into this a little bit further. So Kash Patel, the new director of the FBI, He's a former congressional staffer, a National Security Council official, and he's definitely a key Trump ally. He is very loyal, and he was known for aggressively pushing claims that the FBI was weaponized against President Trump. He was the first FBI director in modern history confirmed without bipartisan support. Again, when we're talking about national security, when we're talking about defense, traditionally, a lot of these appointments have bipartisan support because these organizations inherently are nonpartisan. Now, perhaps you have certain political views and you believe they are very partisan, but by and large, within the national security community, we consider them as nonpartisan. So Kash Patel came in as FBI director and had sweeping reform plans. He wanted to move 1,500 FBI employees out of Washington, D.C., and he also wants to fire several senior officials who are linked to prior Trump investigations. So, of course, you can probably gather this from Kash Patel's background, but many critics will say that Kash Patel is a political appointee rather than a career law enforcement professional. Now, given the background, that's hard to dispute whether or not you're for or against Kash Patel. However, traditionally, the FBI director is supposed to be an independent agent, an independent director. There are a lot of questions about whether a Trump loyalist, a traditionally Trump loyalist, will be a loyalist to President Trump in that nonpartisan position. Now, Dan Bongino as deputy director. The deputy director position has generally gone to a career FBI agent with operational expertise. So there were reports that Director Patel had initially assured FBI agents that he would uphold this tradition, that he would appoint a deputy director or a deputy director would be appointed who was an FBI agent who had a career the FBI. However, President Trump picked Bongino instead. Dan Bongino, I said, former Secret Service agent, former NYPD officer. He is a very right-wing media personality, and that I think is an understatement. He is quite the, how do I put this in a very diplomatic term, a very incendiary personality. If you go back to some of his tweets, you can see his personality really showing through. He is one of President Trump's most vocal defenders and was a fierce critic of the FBI. He has called the FBI, quote, irredeemably corrupt. He has pushed for mass firings of agents involved in Trump-related investigations, and now he'll be overseeing the day-to-day operations of this agency, this very agency that he has criticized for many, many years. So there's been internal backlash. As I said, Patel had initially promised that he would appoint someone with career experience in the FBI. This blindsided many career FBI officials. The FBI Agents Association had expected Patel to choose this experienced agent. They saw it as a, quote, slap in the face, according to some reports. The Justice Department has already requested also a list of thousands of FBI employees involved in January 6th and relevant Trump investigations, essentially causing fears that there would be politically motivated purges. Aside from the political controversies, the political implications of all of this, there are also key national security concerns. When you're having upheaval at such a integral organizations such as the FBI, you're going to perhaps demotivate the workforce. This could significantly deteriorate our efforts against serious threats, our efforts on counterterrorism, our efforts against cybercrime, our efforts on counterintelligence operations against China and Russia. We've done a couple of episodes on counterintelligence. That's a big concern that's facing our country when you care about intellectual property theft, when you care about blackmail, when you care about a lot of different things. The FBI is generally handling those things. So will we be able to sustain those efforts under this type of upheaval? Who knows? I say who knows quite a bit because, gee wilkers, there's a lot going on today. And I don't know what to think about it because there's so much. And a lot of us, our minds are going on such in such a quick, imagine one of those ellipticals, and now imagine someone doing it at about 200 miles per hour. They're probably going to be they're probably going to catch fire or something, you know? So that feels like my mind right now. Anyway, sorry, that was bad. That was a bad joke. But anyway, Patel and Bongino, the two new leaders of the FBI, they've suggested redirecting FBI resources away from domestic extremism cases like January 6th and towards violent crime instead. Now, critics are concerned that this could weaken efforts to combat white collar crime and political corruption, in addition to all the concerns one would have about January 6th, uh, organizations like the Proud Boys, domestic terrorists, and so on. So this is a very radical shakeup. It's one of the most radical shakeups in FBI leadership history. Now, will these two new leaders actually reform the FBI in a way that restores public trust, or will they serve as political loyalists? That answer is going to depend on which side of the aisle you're actually on, but we'll see. I mean, we'll really see over the next 4 years what's going to happen. So before we wrap, I wanted to cover some other stories that I didn't really have the time to get to today. I wanted to just do some quick hits on some other stories I'm covering in the world. This week, the government of Thailand deported Uyghurs to China. They deported at least around 40 Uyghurs to China after holding them in detention for over a decade, despite warnings from human rights groups about potential torture and persecution by Beijing. This deportation has drawn sharp condemnation from the United States, the United Nations, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Amnesty International called it, quote, unimaginably cruel. Now, China has been accused of crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, where a lot of Uyghurs are, but Thailand justified the deportation by saying no third country had stepped up to take them. This also follows a recent meeting between Thai Prime Minister Shinawatra and President Xi, I believe a few weeks ago. They talked about a lot of things concerning their bilateral relationship. Of course, we've done an episode on the plight of the Uyghurs. Many people will call it an active genocide that's happening to them in China. So this move is certainly very controversial. Secretary of State Rubio released a statement condemning the move as well. Another quick story I want to cover. North Korea. North Korea is expanding their military support to Russia. So over the past few months, we had received confirmation that North Korean troops had essentially been fighting on behalf of Russia in Ukraine. So according to South Korea's intelligence community, North Korea has sent additional troops to Russia, and they've also redeployed forces to the front lines in Ukraine's Kursk region. So this is certainly a deepening of Pyongyang's direct involvement in the war, aligning with the growing military ties to Moscow under a security and defense treaty. However, North Korean troops aren't doing too well in Russia. There are many reports that they are struggling with modern warfare, and they're very much prone to falling victim to Ukrainian drone strikes. Again, not many of these North Korean troops have actually fought a real war. I believe the last time North Korea fought a real war was the Korean War, which was around more than 70 years ago, 72 years ago. It ended in 1953. So it's been a while. They're not doing too well, but watch this story because this is indicative of that North Korean Russia relationship deepening and deepening and deepening. And then another story. Kurdish leader Abdullah Ocalan called for the PKK to lay down arms. Now, the PKK is this Kurdish group that's been fighting essentially the government of Turkey. So, this PKK leader who's been in prison is calling for the group to disband and abandon the armed struggle after decades of this conflict with Turkey. And it's been a pretty nasty conflict, mind you. The move follows Turkish nationalist leader Devlet Bahçeli's push for a political resolution with potential implications for Turkey's Kurdish policy. PKK commanders have dismissed the call, however, accusing Turkey of continuing military crackdowns in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey's southeast. So, will Turkey finally solve the Kurdish issue? I'm pessimistic about that, but we shall see, which is a common theme for most of the stories here. We shall see. We shall see. We shall see. We shall see. But alas, the weekend is almost here. The weekend is here. That does not mean the world is going to get any less crazy. Friday night, I was out. They fired General CQ Brown. So who knows what this Friday night's going to bring. But for now, this is the world according to me. Andre, stay tuned for a great episode on Ukraine early this week, and definitely check out our last episode, What in the World, with Chung Hong and Alex Eid covering all of the political chaos going on in South Korea. But for now, I'll see you later.